This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome to tonight's presentation. We're glad you're here. Before we begin, let me mention a couple of virtual programs that are coming up. In honor of National Native American History Month on Monday, November 24th at 6:30, we'll have a presentation titled Lenape People, Life Before the Colonists, presented by award-winning historian John Schneider. And for us who enjoy learning about artists, on Thursday, December 4th at 7 p.m., we'll have another presentation by an art historian, Felicia Stadelman. It's going to be called Through the Eyes of the Artist Norman Rockwell. Thank you everyone for attending tonight's presentation, and also I'd like to thank the Hightstown Library Association for sponsoring this program. However, let's get started with the program you came to see and hear tonight. And our speaker is Ellie Gorman. She's the Education and PR Manager of the American Swedish Historical Museum. This museum is in South Philadelphia, and it welcomes everyone to explore cultural identity through stories of Swedes and all Scandinavians, and to connect with a vibrant community dedicated to preserving and interpreting culture. Visit americanswedish.org for more information about their events, programs, and exhibits. Whenever you're ready, Ellie, we're ready to get started. Do you need a little more time? It looks like you might be muted. I know I heard you a little earlier.
Ellie, we're not hearing you at all. Try turning your sound on and off in the settings.
Bear with us, everybody. I'm sure we'll get this sorted out in just a minute. Oh, yeah.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, can everyone?
Okay, excellent.
Can everybody hear me? Yes?
I can hear you for sure. And I see your picture too, your slide.
Awesome. Perfect. Sorry, I just had to, apparently I had to reload my window and then everything would work perfectly. So we should be all set. Awesome.
Wonderful. Thanks everybody for waiting.
Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you guys so much for coming tonight and for having the museum. This is one of my favorite times of year at the museum because we get to do these kinds of programs and get to kind of give some background about Sweden and about our museum, and especially about some Swedish holiday traditions, especially as we get up into this really exciting holiday season that is already so close to being upon us. So I'm going to start by giving a little bit of background about the museum, then we'll talk a little bit about Sweden, some background about the country, and then we'll go into different holidays and end, of course, with all of our favorite December holidays, which are my personal favorites. So this is our building. If anyone has ever come to visit us down in South Philadelphia, we're located inside FDR Park, right next to all of the stadiums. We're right across the street from the Eagles practice facility and down the street from the Phillies and all of that. So this is our museum. As of today, we are just voted Best Museum in Philadelphia by Metro Philadelphia, which is a very exciting honor for us. So our museum was originally founded in 1926 by Amanda Johnson. We're coming up next year in our centennial anniversary, our 100th anniversary, which also coincides with the 250th anniversary of America. So it's going to be a very, very busy year for us and for the entirety of Philadelphia and the surrounding area. So this building was originally built in 1926. The cornerstone was laid that year, partly during the sesquicentennial celebration held in Philadelphia. And it was built partially to commemorate the New Sweden colony, which originally was on this site or in the Philadelphia, Delaware Valley area. In the 1630s, we'll touch on that a little bit in just a little bit. And the building was designed by Amanda Johnson. The idea of the museum was to really honor the contributions of Swedes and Swedish Americans to American history, American culture, and currently our museum, our mission has shifted slightly to include a broader definition, not just Swedes, but also all Scandinavians. We do exhibitions on Finns, on Norwegians, on all different Nordic countries. But our museum we're pretty small site still, but we have 12 different galleries that touch on these different kinds of contributions. We have some galleries about the early history of. One second. There we go. We have galleries about the New Sweden colony, immigration that took place post the New Sweden colony in the 1800s and 1900s, which for many people who have Swedish or other Scandinavian ancestry in America, their immigrant great ancestors were more likely to have come over in the 1800s or 1900s, and we touch on that as in our museum. We also look at different contributions of Swedish Americans to America in the fields of decorative arts, music, science, literature. We also have a children's gallery dedicated to Pippi Longstocking, which is a very, very fun one. But certainly, if you've never been, definitely come check it out. We're a little hidden gem in Philadelphia among all of the many other museums in Philadelphia. But today we'll talk about Sweden traditions and what Sweden is kind of like today in a variety of ways. So we'll get started with that. So Sweden is one country that's part of Scandinavia. It's similar in size and shape to California. That's a pretty good reference point. It's a little bit bigger than California, but it's a useful reference point for Americans for sure. It's almost 1,000 miles long, stretching from north to south, which is about the same distance as going from LA to Los Angeles along the west coast of the United States. But despite its decent size, it's one of the largest countries in Western Europe. But despite that size, it still has one of the smallest populations in Europe. It's only the 15th largest out of all the countries. And it's pretty sparsely populated with only 22 inhabitants per square kilometer. And the majority of those inhabitants live in southern Sweden in areas like Stockholm and other large cities in this area. Because of Sweden's really long size and its position so far north, parts of the country are above the Arctic Circle. The climate really varies in the country. The differences between seasons can be really dramatic. Summer is warm and light. Fall and spring are both relatively short, and winter can be very long and dark. The average daytime temperature in the summer in Sweden ranges from around 45 or around 54 to around 60s, 70s, depending on where you are in the country. But in the winter time, In southern Sweden, it can be around 34 degrees Fahrenheit for our temperatures, but up in northern Sweden, it can get down to, or on average, it's around 6 degrees, because there's some areas of that part of Sweden that don't receive any sunlight at all, especially in that period around December, which is something that we'll definitely talk a little bit more about when we talk about December holidays in Sweden, because those kind of things go hand in hand there. Yeah, so that's some general overview. The climate and things like that really have they really work to shape the country and the way that the population is divided. Other parts that have really kind of contribute to what Sweden has become today are obviously Sweden's history. So here we'll go through just a few of the major kind of points, and especially things that are specifically relevant to Swedish and Scandinavian history in America. The first point of that being the Viking Age, which lasted between the 18th century and 11th century. The Vikings, or Norse people, either term is used, traveled as far south as the Mediterranean and North Africa and the Middle East, and then as far west as Greenland and Newfoundland and Canada. They were the very first people from Europe to make it to any part of North America. In around the year 1000, they arrived in Newfoundland. In general, Vikings were farmers. They had a lot of trade relationships with others in Europe, other clans, and then other groups that weren't Vikings. But of course, they do have their very famous reputation as being warriors, raiders, kind of violent, especially because a lot of what was written about Vikings was written not by the Vikings themselves, but by the people that the Vikings were raiding or were fighting with. We have an image down in our bottom left corner there that is a typical Viking warrior in their Viking warrior costume. One thing to especially note there is that kind of stereotypical image that you might have seen of a Viking with horns on their helmet. That's not actually true. That was invented by an Italian opera writer in the 1800s. That he wanted a cool, interesting costume, and so he added the horns to the helmet. But in real life, that would not have been practical. So Vikings, while they might have had horns with them to use for drinking or for blowing into to make calls to other groups, they had their helmets that were just smooth like that. They also would have had shields, and that circle shape that were all made out of wood, very similar to that one that we can see in the picture. Another famous thing about Vikings, of course, is their boats. That boat right there is one that was discovered in a Viking burial mound. Vikings, when they died, and if they were a warrior who died in battle, would be buried in their boat. And because of that, we have a decent amount of archaeological evidence of Vikings, which is really helpful. But Viking boats could be as small as 20 or so feet. On average, they were closer to around 60 or 70 feet, and some were even longer. And then the boat that we see in the picture there is around 75 feet long, but only about 15 or 20 feet wide, because to make it really easy for navigation and things like that. At the top there, we see some Viking runestones. Those can tell stories about different Viking warriors or victories or things like that. And they're especially common in Sweden. For whatever reason, the Vikings that lived in that area wrote a lot on runestones. Jumping ahead a little bit by about 400 years, during the once the Vikings had all kind of committed or had converted to Christianity. At that time, around the same time, the Kingdom of Sweden came into being, and eventually by the 1630s, when Sweden and many other countries in Europe became involved in the 30 Years' War, Sweden had really become a world power with territories that stretched a little bit further to the west or to the east. At that point they had control of Finland and some parts of Russia and Estonia. They were a significant Protestant power fighting against the Catholic Habsburgs. We can see right there, that's their king, Gustavus Adolphus, who died in battle in 1632, there's a famous portrait, which we see at the bottom there, of him dying in battle, the Battle of Lutzen. At the same time, in the 1630s, as this war is raging, other countries in Europe are also kind of involved for a new struggle for power, and that is getting land in the New World and having colonies, and having that kind of become an important part of like being an empire, of being a world power. And so Sweden wanted to get on this. Gustavus Adolphus had okayed the idea of a new Sweden colony. He died, of course, in battle. His daughter, Queen Christina, became the queen at only 6 years old, but she and her advisors signed off on the new Sweden colony, which came to our area right here in the Delaware Valley in 1638. The Kalmar Nickel arrived at in what is now Wilmington, Delaware. You can go down to that site too and see the take a ride on the Kalmar Nickel and see their site. Very wonderful. We love working with them. But the New Sweden colony only lasted for 17 years, from 1638 to 1655. But despite its short-lived nature, there were some definite things that came out of the colony that have really influenced the Delaware Valley. Anytime you see the colors blue and yellow, whether it's the Delaware flag or the Philadelphia flag, that is because of the origins of this area as a Swedish colony. You also, once you start looking for it, you'll start seeing names of places or roads that have Swedes in them, or that have the names of different Swedish figures from this period. So there's little evidences all over the place. Another thing that Swedes and Finns, who both came at this time, really brought to this area was the development of the log cabin, with notched logs, like similar to Lincoln logs. If you've ever used a Lincoln log or seen Lincoln logs before, the way that they notch together, that is a Swedish and Finnish invention. Like other places in Europe didn't build their houses that way. So anytime that you see log cabins, that comes from Swedes and Finns. That's how Scandinavians built their houses. But the New Sweden colony only lasted 17 years. It was soon taken over by the Dutch, who were then taken over by the English. And eventually, when the English had the land, they gave it to William Penn. And that kind of started the creation of Pennsylvania and that area. And at that time, Swedes were pushed out away from the Delaware River into further into New Jersey and into Chester County up in Pennsylvania. So after this point, Sweden continued to be involved in a few in different wars up until the mid 1800s, at which point it became very impoverished and really had decided that they needed to maintain peace. And so Sweden has been at peace for the next 200 years. They were not involved in either of the two world wars, though they did enter into agreements with both Germany and the Allied powers during those wars. And in that time, Sweden has become renowned for its role in international peace work. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute is just one of many organizations about international peace and that kind of thing, disarmament, that are started in Sweden and have become movements in Sweden. And because the country has been at peace for so long, it's really enabled the country to really develop its economy, as well as like the happiness of its citizens. So just a little bit about Sweden's government. It's a constitutional monarchy. We see our royal family up in the corner there. They function very similarly to the English royal family, in that the king has no political power and is really a representative and ceremonial figure. And their real government, or their government that controls the actual government, is a one-chamber parliament called the Riksdag with 349 members. Almost 50% of its members have been women in recent years, making it one of the most gender-neutral bodies of government in the world. Sweden also became a member of the European Union in 1995, but it doesn't use the euro like many other countries in Europe do. In the 2000s, the people of Sweden elected to continue to use their currency, which is called the krona, or crown, and not switch to the euro. Sweden did join NATO in March of 2024 in response specifically to threats from Russia during the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So here are some kind of traditional symbols that you might have seen of Sweden. Things that some of these might be familiar, some might not. Up in our left-hand corner there, that is our Dala horse. Hopefully that's a symbol that you've seen before. That's one of the most common symbols of Sweden. The Dala horse comes from the Dalarna region of Sweden. Originally, the Dalarna region of Sweden is a region with lots of craftspeople, lots of different kinds of artistry that have come out of that region. And originally they did lots of carvings, and horses were a common figure. Sometimes they were painted, sometimes they were unpainted. But at the United States World's Fair in 1939 in New York City, they kind of introduced this figure of this painted Dala horse, painted in this fashion, to the world. And ever since then, the Dala horse has become a little bit more standardized. The figure is very much standard. That's what it looks like. The decorations can be lots of different colors, but they're that same kind of stylized type of painting. It's called Kurbits painting. In Sweden, it's very similar to a Norwegian art form called rosemaling, if anyone's heard of that. But it's become really a symbol of Sweden and America in the ensuing almost a century. And most Dala horses to this day are still made and handmade, hand carved, hand painted in the Dalarna region of Sweden, though others do the same practices and hand paint and hand carve Dala horses themselves, but they're not mass manufactured, which is pretty cool. Down in our bottom left corner is a picture I have to represent the concept of fika. Fika is a coffee and cake break that is like institutional in Swedish offices in Sweden, where in the afternoon you just kind of like everybody takes a fika, they take a break, they go get a snack, they go catch up with their coworkers, things like that. But it's a nice thing that we get to do sometimes at our museum. We get to have a little fika, and we appreciate that when we get to. On our right side there, we see a traditional Swedish dress. In the 18th century, there was a push for Swedish nationalism and regionalism, and so they developed these different national costumes to kind of represent individual provinces of Sweden as well as the entire nation of Sweden. Nowadays, these are worn just for some official occasions and national celebrations. If you ever come to our museum and come especially at like midsummer, you'll see plenty of our Swedish ladies wearing their national costumes and showing their regional pride for their specific provinces where they came from in Sweden. A specific group of people that we are definitely going to that is important to touch on in Sweden are the Sami. The Sami are one of the world's smallest groups of indigenous people. Their population is estimated to be about 15 to 30,000 in Sweden, out of a total of 60 to 100,000 that live in the whole of Scandinavia. Many in Norway, and then some in Finland, and some in Russia, very northwestern Russia. They're known for fishing, fur trapping, and especially for reindeer herding. In the northernmost parts of Sweden, they have specific, they are divided into villages, which are administrative unions within a specific geographical area, where the people who live in that specific area are responsible or have the rights to herd the reindeer and take care of the reindeer in that area. Another thing that they're particularly known for is duaji, which is specific types of handcrafts that are made to be usable. So whether they're clothes, their hats, their drums, their baskets, things like that, that are made by hand and are made to be beautiful, but are also made to be used. And they're also specifically made out of like natural materials, things that come from animals, things that come from nature, that kind of thing. And the Sami have lived in this area for thousands of years. They've lived there for thousands of years. And there's at various times have come into conflict with the governments of different Scandinavian countries, but since the 1980s, they've adopted their own flag, their own national anthem, and their own parliament to get some representation for them in the region. Another particularly important point for Scandinavians is the idea of sustainability. There's a lot of concern for the environment in Swedish society. We see Greta Thunberg up there, who is obviously a very important climate activist in current times. A couple important points to note here are that 1/3 of all energy consumed in Sweden comes from renewable resources. They have a significant amount of electric vehicles used, and the most, I think, feel like surprising statistic from Sweden is that 99% of household waste in Sweden is recycled, specifically because they have a system of direct heating where they're able to burn refuse and extra things that can't be recycled in traditional ways and use it for heating. Sweden is a pretty cold country, so they need to use a lot of energy. So it works really well for them to be able to heat their homes that way and use their waste and recycle while also not using non-renewable energy. Talk a little bit about our next little section of our presentation talks a little bit about things that come from Sweden that we see in America in a variety of fields. Exports, IKEA is definitely a way that many of us in America experience Sweden most often. There's a lot of other companies like Volvo obviously come from Sweden. And then there's a variety of especially like electronic and telecom companies. If anyone's used Spotify or Bluetooth, things like that, those are Swedish inventions. And so because Sweden's population is pretty small, they don't really have they don't have enough of a domestic market to really sustain big companies. So they have to do a lot of exporting, and especially the American market is great for that. Literature, some of these figures might be familiar to us. Pippi Longstocking is, of course, the biggest export, or the biggest literature export, I would argue, of Sweden. We see here up in the right-hand corner. Down in the bottom left or bottom right-hand corner are the Moomins. The Moomins are very, very popular figures in a variety of countries, including Japan. Lately, the Moomin trolls are written by, it's a series of books written by Tove Jansson, who's a Finnish writer who writes her books in Swedish, then they're translated into English. On our left side there, we see a Nordic noir mystery. This type of Swedish crime novel has also become pretty popular in recent years. Music is, of course, a major export of Sweden to America. The biggest feature or biggest figure in this field is, of course, ABBA, and probably will be forever, since they became famous in the 1970s. But in that same period, figures are groups like Ace of Base also became very popular, and really have a lot of sway in the American imagination. In more recent years, there's a lot of electronica and dance music from artists like Robin or Tove, as well as DJs and music producers like Swedish House Mafia or Avicii. Max Martin there in the bottom right corner is still to this day has been for the last decade or two one of the biggest music producers in the world. Works with Taylor Swift and lots of other very, very big pop stars. But there's definitely a lot the Swedish music industry in all the decades since ABBA blew up in America has really taken on a huge role in American culture. In Sweden itself, Eurovision is very popular, which is not the case in America. But this singing competition has been won by Sweden more times than any other country. ABBA won by singing Waterloo back in the 1970s, and Sweden has won a record of 7 times, including in 2023, which is the photo that we have right there. But it's a huge deal in the country of Sweden, and is a very important part of the music industry in Sweden. Other bits of popular culture that have made their way from Sweden to America are film. From the very beginning days of early Hollywood, we've had Swedish actors and actresses coming over. Two of the American Film Institute's top 5 greatest female film legends are Swedes. Ingrid Bergman there on the right began acting in Swedish films and then came to America in 1939 to remake one of her Swedish films in English. The film did well, and then her show on stage did well, and by 1947 42, she had starred in Casablanca with Humphrey Bogart, and went on to win 3 Academy Awards, a Tony, 2 Emmys, 4 Golden Globes. Greta Garbo there on the left had a similarly long-lived and impressive career. She came to Hollywood earlier in 1925 and was originally a silent film actress, but transitioned into speaking films. She was nominated for 4 Academy Awards and won an Academy Honorary Award in the 1950s. In more modern times, there's still Swedish actresses that grace our the silver screen. The Skarsgårds all along there in the bottom have made their mark in a lot of films, and my personal favorite in the top right corner, Dolph Lundgren from Rocky IV, is very important and wonderful, and great Swede that we were able to have in our Rocky movies here. Sports are also, as in America, a very big deal in Sweden. The most popular sports over there are soccer and hockey, soccer being big all over Europe and hockey being especially big in countries where it's very cold, but they have had lots of success. Bjorn Borg up in the top left is maybe one of the most influential, most well-known Swedish athletes, I think probably ever, as a tennis legend, but they've also had lots of success in skiing and other Olympic sports. As well as pole vaulting there down in the bottom right. That was just from this past Olympics. Mondo Duplantis beat everyone in the pole vault very handily. Let's see, the Nobel Prize is another thing that we hear about that is very important in America or probably anywhere in the world. And this is awarded every year, both jointly in Sweden and in Norway, in Stockholm and Oslo, because Alfred Nobel wrote in his will that he wanted the prizes to be distributed that way. And at the time of his will's writing, Norway and Sweden were one united country, which they were up until the early 1900s. And so some of the prizes are awarded in Stockholm, some are awarded in Oslo, but always on the same day. English obviously is a language that has borrowed a lot of words from a lot of different countries. But less words from Swedish than perhaps other languages, but we still have a few. The word moped comes from Swedish. Smorgasbord is a Swedish word. The sport of orienteering comes from Swedish. Words gauntlet, rutabaga, the mineral tungsten, as well as the days of the week come from Norse Viking language. Wednesday comes from the Norse god Odin, Thursday from Thor, Friday from the god Frey, and so on. Okay, and now we're gonna get to talk a little bit about a variety of public holidays that are celebrated in Sweden and the different traditions that are associated with them. Some of these holidays are ones that we do celebrate here in America. They're just celebrated differently, and some are completely unrelated to anything that we do in America. Holidays like Christmas and Easter are really important, and so is New Year's. But other holidays often have a shift or have a connection to shifts in the seasons or specific things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into it. Starting early in the year, we have Easter. On our top right-hand corner up there, those little buns up there are called semla or semlor, plural, semla, singular. These are the food made in Sweden for Fat Tuesday or Shrove Tuesday, the Tuesday before Ash Wednesday. They're cardamoms, spiced wheat buns. They cut the tops off and are filled with a mix of milk and almond paste, and then they're topped with whipped cream and dusted with powdered sugar. And these are eaten just before the start of Lent. And then when you get to actual Easter, there's a few different traditions that are found in Sweden. On our top left corner, those are called påskris, which are Easter trees. They're decorated birch branches with feathers. When Easter happens in Sweden, spring hasn't quite arrived because they're further north than we are. So påskeris bring bright colors inside a house or outside if you hang your påskeris outside before flowers start blooming, but they're a really common decoration. Sometimes they're all different colors, sometimes they're just yellow. On our bottom there, we see some kids dressed up as following the tradition of Easter witches in Sweden, which is something that's very different than anything we do in America. There's a legend that on Maundy Thursday, so the Thursday before Good Friday, there were witches who flew off to consort with the devil after Judas betrayed Jesus. And because of this tradition, nowadays kids dress up as Easter witches with discarded clothes. They always have like headscarves and things like that to be witches. You paint your face with bright red cheeks and freckles across your nose. And they go to house to house, presenting occupants with paintings or drawings to get candy, very similarly to American Halloween. When they eventually they're given Easter eggs. Their Easter eggs are different than ours. They're made of paper mache and are larger and function pretty similarly to Easter baskets, with like presents or candy treats inside. A little bit later in the year, not too far later, on April 30th is the holiday called Valborg or Walpurgis Night. It's the eve of originally it was the eve of a Christian feast day. That was celebrated on May 1st, but nowadays it's really an excuse to get together for a giant bonfire and choral singing. Choral singing has a very long tradition in Sweden, and this particular holiday is there's lots of singing and that kind of thing, especially at universities. This is also a very big holiday for college students. It's normally right after exams are over and everything is done, and it's the beginning of like this time of freedom. Originally, these bonfires, they would light this bonfire on this special occasion and then let farm animals and livestock on farms go out and be safe from any wild animals that could get them, because the wild animals would be afraid of the fire. But nowadays, the bonfires remain, but the farm animals are not really so much of a part of Valborg anymore. In the summertime, there are some very important and special and unique holidays in Sweden. Midsummer is one that a lot of people have heard of. Midsummer takes place the longest day of the year in June, around the 20th or 21st. Everything is green. The sun barely sets. In parts of Sweden that are above the Arctic Circle, the sun does not set at all. And so it's the solstice. People often go out to a countryside or go out somewhere where there's a lot of grass and greenery. They will gather around, eat herring, which is a very common Swedish food, potatoes, things like that, and do special dances around the maypole. That picture up in the left-hand corner is from one of our midsummer celebrations. We have musicians come in, play special songs, and everyone does the dances. Flower crowns are all there, made by hand that day by our wonderful volunteers, which is awesome. It's a really fun and exciting and interesting and different kind of celebration. On our right-hand side there, we see some pictures of a crayfish party in Sweden, which has not a lot of similarities to American culture. Our director likes to liken it to like a crab feast, which isn't really a holiday or a celebration so much as it is just something that happens sometimes in the summer. But Swedes are really into to crayfish. So crayfish has long been a delicacy in Sweden, but long ago, hundreds of years ago, overfishing led to the crayfish almost dying out, and it eventually led to a law that crayfish could not be caught until after a certain date in the late summer. And to honor that tradition, nowadays there's a certain point in August, and after that point, you're allowed to have your crayfish party. So Swedes will get together and sometime in August to eat crayfish. And at a crayfish themed party, they have themed hats and lanterns and decorations. It's all typically outdoors. The way crayfish is served in Sweden is a little different than other crayfish we might have had before, especially in New Orleans, where crayfish is a pretty common part of the cuisine. Swedish crayfish are served cold with dill, and they also are accompanied by other foods like meatballs and potatoes and things like that. And so these images right here are from one of our museum crayfish parties, which we have every August. It's always a very fun and festive time. Lots of Swedes singing drinking songs and things like that. It's a very cool experience to have. Okay, so once summer is over, we move into my favorite time of year, which is our December holidays. Okay, so by December, Sweden has very few hours of daylight. The first Sunday of Advent is really a sign that Christmas is approaching, and so Swedes put out electric candles and stars in their windows to keep the dark away. So lots of, in Sweden, Christmas is called Jul, J-U-L, and a lot of their Swedish traditions around Christmas have that Jul prefix on them, which tells you that it's about Christmas. Our bottom right-hand corner there is a Yule board dinner, which is a big smorgasbord feast. It's often celebrated on December 23rd, like as a big Christmas Eve celebration. There's always a Christmas ham. In modern times, there's meatballs. There's lots of different very specific foods that Swedes are very, very particular about. We have a Yule board dinner at our museum every year. Ours is always the first Friday of December, so ours is coming up very soon. Other important food traditions are glögg, which we can see in the top right corner there, which is a spicy mulled wine with blanched almonds and raisins. It's served warm and it's very sweet. Other things are pepparkakor, which are gingerbread cookies, very similar to ginger snaps. I don't have a photo of those, but those you can buy at IKEA or at our gift shop, and they're very good. Some important Swedish Christmas figures are up in the top left corner there. That is the Yule tomte. A tomte in Sweden are gnomes that live on farms that protect the animals and people who live there. The Yule tomte specifically is the Christmas tomte because it has that Yule prefix. He's a gift giver, very similar to Santa Claus. And he rides the Julebuck, which is the Christmas goat that he's standing next to. And down below, we see some straw versions of a Julebuck, which is Julbock. Kids sometimes will leave out a bowl of porridge for the Yule tomte, and they hope for presents in return, much like kids in America might leave out milk and cookies for Santa Claus. Straw ornaments like the Julebuck and like many other types of straw ornaments that can be stars or hearts or different things. Since Swedes were originally farmers, the straw decorations were made from straw that they already had on their farms. And the idea was to use a material like straw so that you could, after Christmas was over, put those ornaments outside the house, and then wild animals could come and eat the straw. And it would be a little bit like you were sharing your celebration, your happiness of the season with all the animals. Nowadays, people will typically just save their ornaments and reuse them the same way that we would do for any other ornaments or any other things. Another tradition at this time of year is the Julemarknad, which is a Yule Christmas market. They're typically held outdoors with many vendors. The Gamla Stan market in Stockholm is particularly famous for this. And we also have a Christmas market at our museum that's coming up. That is the first weekend of December, the 6th and 7th. We do a Christmas market, and we also include a celebration for St. Lucia, which is the last thing that we're going to talk about in our holiday traditions. So St. Lucia Day is December 13th every year. It's the darkest time of the year, mid-December. Swedes celebrate Lucia. So St. Lucy originally was a Sicilian saint who was martyred at the age of 19 during the Diocletian persecution in the year 304. As a saint, she's commonly pictured with eyes because there's stories where she either had to take her eyes out to discourage a suitor or because they were removed during torture. But Christian missionaries to Scandinavia after her death in the following centuries, they brought the story of St. Lucy bringing light and food to persecuted Christians in the Roman catacombs. And the picture that they kind of painted as they brought the story was of a woman with a crown of candles on her head to keep her hands free to be able to bring food and supplies to these persecuted Christians down in the dark. So she would have the candles in her head so she could keep her arms free for that and still be able to see. And so this idea of St. Lucy as bringing light in the darkness really struck a chord with Scandinavians, where they live up in a place where it is very dark for a lot of the year. And especially at this December time of year, bringing light in the darkness is exactly what Scandinavia needs. So the St. Lucia Day is most commonly celebrated by the Lutheran population of Nordic countries and by their descendants in North America, including Swedes at our museum. The celebration originally would have individual families would typically have their oldest daughter dress as Lucia, and she would get up early and bring treats and cookies to her parents, accompanied by any of her siblings who were dressed in other costumes. And then they would go visit other families and friends. In the 1920s, a newspaper in Stockholm elected an official Lucia for Sweden, and other Swedish cities followed suit. At ASHM, we've had yearly Lucia processions since 1938. Our Lucia pageants feature girls dressed as Lucia and her attendants, boys as star boys. Some girls will be folk dancers and do traditional Swedish dancing, and the youngest children will dress as pepparkakor cookies and tomta. And if this will work for me. This is a little snapshot of one of our Lucia processions from just a few years ago. We'll do a procession on our steps with singing traditional Swedish songs, and girls dressed up, one as Lucia, some as her attendants, and then other younger children as other figures in the celebration. So that is what I have for all of us today, about Sweden, about our holiday traditions. Just a couple of things to note are some events that I already mentioned. Our Yule Board dinner is coming up on December 5th, and our Lucia and Christmas market are the 6th and the 7th. Those events the market runs the entire day. There's live music the entire day, and then we have Lucia performances twice each day that each run about half an hour, with about 30 or 40 kids who participate, which is awesome. We also have outdoor saunas coming to the museum. If you want to take a sauna, like a traditional Finnish sauna, we are the site for that this year. And starting next year for our 2026, we are launching a special Third Thursday virtual program series. So definitely, if you're interested in virtual programs like this one, ones with our curator, ones with different speakers, we do virtual field trips to museums, things like that, please sign up for our mailing list, because we do lots of fun things and we would love to have you all there. But I'm gonna close out if it'll let me. Go back and unshare my screen. Awesome.
Well, thank you, Ellie. That was very interesting. What a quick tour of Swedish history. Did a nice job of condensing a lot of information. We have a few questions. If anyone wants to add their question for me to read to Ellie, just add it to the chat. And I wanted to ask myself personally, how did Philadelphia wind up with a Swedish Historical Museum? I'm from the Midwest, and I think of Minnesota area as having a large Scandinavian population. I wasn't thinking that with Philadelphia.
Yeah, so Minnesota they have their own Swedish museum. There are 3 Swedish museums in the United States, one in Minnesota and Minneapolis, one in Chicago, and then one in Philadelphia. Ours was the first, but ours was founded just because our founder thought like this was the place where the Swedes came first, even though there's not a huge Swedish population in our area. It was still like, this is, to commemorate the New Sweden colony and the very first site that Swedes came when they first came to America. He decided like this was the spot. And it also, the laying of the cornerstone also coincided with the sesquicentennial 150th anniversary of America celebration that was happening in Philadelphia in 1926. So it was also kind of trying to piggyback off of that. There was attention focused on Philadelphia for those kind of things, so they also wanted to carry over that, and the King and Queen of Sweden came for that.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the St. Lucia holiday, are there pagan roots to any of the customs of that holiday?
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I know, yeah. I don't know. That's a really good question. Not that I know of, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something like that. There's a, that kind of thing creeps into a lot of different holidays in different ways. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know anything specific.
And I was wondering if in Sweden, is there anybody who's comparable to the Santa Claus that we
Yeah.
celebrate?
Yeah, the Jultomte is very much like the Santa Claus. So it's the one of the like the specific Christmas gnomes, but he's like the specific Christmas gnome, and he's the one he is the Jultomte, and he brings presents and things like that to kids. But no reindeer. He has a Christmas goat, a Yule buck, not reindeer, despite the fact that Sweden has many reindeer that live there.
That's what I thought just a second ago. I thought that's what reindeer are.
Yeah.
The questions that I see are not related necessarily to holidays, the question I see in the chat. But somebody asked if Swedesboro, New Jersey, was that part of the new Sweden colony?
Let's see. Swedesboro, it definitely was settled by Swedes. I am not 100% sure when it would. You have to check on like the dates of the like when it was founded, but it was founded by Swedes who came from the New Sweden colony. It's just a matter of timing. I'd have to look it up to know if it was founded when it was actually the New Sweden colony, or if it was founded by Swedes from the New Sweden colony who kind of moved after the colony had been taken over. But it was absolutely founded by those Swedes, the Swedes who originally came over and were part of the New Sweden colony.
Yeah, I didn't realize that, but it's definitely a connection with
Yep.
a colony. Oh, interesting. Someone's asking, what is the best time of year to visit Sweden?
I think summer. Winter can be very cold, very dark, but their summers are lovely and mild and wonderful. There's a lot of Swedes who live in Sweden, or even Swedes who spend time in America, do a lot of summering in Sweden. A lot of them have like lake houses and things like that they go back to. So it's definitely like the nicest time of year to go. It's a lot nicer than spending a summer in Philadelphia. Winter time is not the best time, but other times, any other time of year is probably a good time to visit.
And I'm just remembering, I've been told that the cold in Scandinavia isn't quite like the cold here. Maybe a drier cold or something like that.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I'm not a. I haven't visited Sweden myself, but I know that we at the museum we will have a marketing assistant who is a Swede who comes over and spends a year with us to like whatever as an intern with us. And our marketing assistant who just left us a month ago could not handle the cold at all, which is crazy because she spent her whole life in Sweden. So I always did wonder if maybe it was just a little bit different, and maybe it's easier to manage in Sweden than it is here.
Maybe the dry climate, a relatively drier climate, is more comfortable than the dampness
It's probably
of us
true.
here, the weather here. Someone's asking, what does fika mean? F-I-K-A.
It means, I'm not sure the actual technical term, but it means really like a cake and coffee break, like a time to stop work. It's a little bit kind of like the Spanish concept of like siesta, where you like kind of take a nap, like a break in the afternoon or a nap. In Sweden, it's a time to take a break, and specifically to have coffee and to have some kind of pastry. There's a lot of different kinds of pastries and things like that are big in Sweden, and that's a great time for that. So a fika is basically just a coffee and pastry break.
Would that be common in a work day?
Yes, yeah. In Sweden, it happens in like every Swedish office. Yeah, yeah. We don't get it every day at our museum, but we do sometimes, which is nice.
Nice custom to have.
Yeah.
What are some famous Swedish inventions? Would you know?
Some famous Swedish inventions. There's all kinds, and we're actually our upcoming in 2026. We're our big exhibit for the year that's going to open in the end of April is about Nordic inventions. So not just Swedish, but a lot of it'll be Swedish, but also a wide variety of Nordic countries and different inventions and things like that have come from those countries. And it's going to be a really, really cool exhibit. So highly suggest you y'all follow it if you are interested in that kind of thing. Some things that we might know about in the history back in American history, if anyone is familiar with with Civil War history. The USS Monitor, which was the first ironclad warship used by the Union Army, was designed by John Ericsson, who was a Swedish American, who's probably the most famous Swedish American inventor. So his design for ironclad warships is huge, and he also designed a lot of other warships that were used. So naval stuff is definitely there's a few different naval figures. And then lots of modern day tech stuff, apps like Spotify, like the invention of like Bluetooth on your phone to be able to talk hands free in the car and that kind of stuff, that comes from Sweden. So there's like all manner of things, whether it's like 1800s naval history or like modern day tech. There's really a lot of different things that all come from Sweden.
I had heard something about Bluetooth coming from Sweden.
Yeah.
Where is the Dala region?
That's a good question. It is one of like the more southern regions of Sweden, as are many regions of Sweden that have people in them. It's the southwest, I want to say. Give me 1 second to check that because I'm pretty sure. Or it's more central. No, yeah, it's right. Yeah, it's like southwest, but not the very south. It's a little more. It's like south central west Sweden, but still in that southern part of Sweden, but closer to Norway than to Finland.
Oh, okay. Someone asked, does Sweden have Starbucks?
I assume so. From talking to our Swedish marketing assistants and other Swedes, it's a lot of Sweden or a lot of American like chains and things like that have definitely made their way to Sweden. So I assume they have Starbucks. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I would not be surprised if they did.
We have a question about St. Lucia Day. I have to say, the only thing I knew about this was just that the photos of girls wearing like crowns of candles. But the question here is, the girls who do wear the wreaths on St. Lucia's Day, do they not burn their hair? Do they have battery-powered candles?
So modern times, we use battery-powered electric candles. Not even that long ago. I've talked to some of our members who were in the St. Lucia pageants in the 1950s, and in that time, even the 50s, 60s, before that, they used actual real wax candles, and they would just have to be very, very careful. And they would, if they had to like wait a little extra time, they would get wax in their hair, and that was like a thing that a lot of them have like stories of that kind of thing. But in modern times, to make sure that no one gets hurt, and also that the museum or the church or whoever is running the celebration, people typically use battery powered candles. Sometimes, I mean, I'm sure that there's still places in Sweden and elsewhere that do use the non-battery powered candles, but you just have to be very, very, very careful. And that's why we always have the oldest girl, the ones who are the most responsible and most able to be safe with candles. They're the ones who get to use the candles.
Yeah, my parents actually had candles on their Christmas trees, on our Christmas trees, but we would set up the tree just before Christmas. And of course, the candles were only for Christmas Eve.
Yes. Yeah. So very similar to that kind of thing. You just have to be very, very, very careful.
Absolutely. Before Ellie leaves, does anyone else have any questions? These were really terrific questions and a wonderful presentation. I'll give people just a second. I'm not seeing any more questions, so maybe we can wrap up. Thank you again, everybody, for coming. And Ellie, for sharing your time and talents with us this evening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Definitely look up our museum, and we'd love to have any one of you come to our Lucia celebration or any of the other many things that we do throughout the year. So awesome.
I'm going to share a screenshot with everybody when you get a follow-up email of the events that are coming up, that slide that Ellie shared. So you'll have that information. I've seen photos of the museum, I would love to visit myself.
Yeah, definitely come. Love to have more folks and love to be able to spread the word a little bit about all the different things that we do here.
Thank you. So everybody, if you have any follow-up questions, you can email the library. We'll pass them on to Ellie. And as I said, you'll have an email follow-up with maybe some other additional resources or some library materials relating to Ellie's presentation. And everybody have a wonderful evening. And we hope to see you at some of our other upcoming programs. Thanks again, Ellie. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.